Hey, good morning. This is Ben with Studio on the Lake. Hey, this is a review of the replacement micro carver that I ordered, the first one. So getting back into the power carving business, and there is a gnome video up and coming, already filmed and edited. I just need to do a little work. So that's the RAM, and I'm going to review it. Did a little review, and then I think that's the RAM version that I'm eventually going to go with on that down the road here. And it's got the two carvers in it, and we'll talk about that. So there was my setup before. I used PJL Enterprise Ultima micro carvers, and it was a combination. You had the burner unit on the left, the power carver on the right, and Pat over in Minnesota, there where they're located, is no longer making those, and that was my carver station setup. So he doesn't make these anymore, and time to move on and find a new one. And he does still make the burners, and there is a burner review in there. I did order a dual burner kit from him, and heck, I can't remember, Ultima or whatever the heck it is, Optima. Those are his two names. I think it's Optima one, but it doesn't matter. Hey, here's those pesky peanuts. I don't know why anybody uses these anymore. This comes from RAM, and interesting enough, that little page right there has a dust blower that goes on the end of your bit. Now, it's interesting. I might order one of those or someday. It keeps the dust out of your hand piece, which they say if you talk to Pat, take an hour out of your day and call him over at PJL Enterprises. He'll tell you that dust is what damages these hand pieces and wears the bearings out, the sealed bearings. So I ordered the low line of this. They have about 4 or 5 versions. RAM seems to be the mid-range in these. When you get into them, if you're not a subscriber, go back and pick up. I reviewed some of these. The hand pieces I thought were relatively the same, but this one was nice enough to come with a diagram and the parts and pieces. I did order a cheap Chinese one, and it came right out of the box, missing a washer and a spacer in the hand piece. So much for quality control. You need to get in. This one was, not that expensive. It was $180. You may think that's expensive, but then you get into the 300, 400 range, which personally I think you probably need to get a professional one if you're doing a lot of carving. And then if you got money to burn, you can go $600 to $1,500 and get one that certainly will do the trick, like the Oz 2 or one of those that several different people like and use. Jordy Johnson, check him out, and Just Carve Rob, and the rest of those guys down below. Jordy had one of these, and he sent it. He sold it. He said he didn't like the fact that it kept cutting off. Well, if you watch Jordy's videos, and it's great fun, he is a little heavy-handed, and he goes to town, and he has no patience. And if you do that with these, wanting to remove a lot of wood, it will cut off on a safety switch so it doesn't overheat. And it's just a simple matter of a couple of seconds, and you can turn it back on. So one of my first gripes, and it's not really legitimate, but the cord's only 2.5 feet long. So this almost needs a extension cord right out of the box. That's not a negative on it, it's just a comment. So in the modern world today, the face of this thing, it's got digital controls, which are interesting. They're not the old analog controls, and everything's a push button. It's got a nice heft to the power supply. It feels good. It's got an on and off switch on the back when you turn it on, and you'll see that in a little bit. It goes into a ready mode, and then it gives you a digital readout where it is 0 to 45,000. Now here is I ordered that with it. This is a 3/32 collet or adapter. It goes over an 1/8 inch bit, so you don't have to have 2 collets in there. If many of you remember, I run the 2 different carvers because I would have an 1/8 inch bit in one, and then I'd have a 3/32 in another. And when I order carving bits, those are the 2 different versions that I like, and they come in different grits, and no particular one company makes the range that I like to use in the same size, meaning an 1/8 or a 3/32, so I have to have the 2 of them. and it just saves time changing. But that has that little collet adapter that slides over the bit. Now, my gripe about that would be I lose them. They get stuck on one bit and they fall off, and they disappear. So the handpiece is nice and high quality. It's a standard 3 plug-in, no different. And you see it came with a spacer in there and a quick release collet. The spacer just helps from messing the collet up. The collet that came with this was a little bit loose, and I have other collets, and I changed them out to one that was a little bit tighter. So here we powered it up. The first thing that it does is gives you that digital readout, and it goes all the way down to 0 and then to 45,000. I'm not sure. I don't have something that I can measure the 45,000 RPM. I don't care. 45 is pretty fast for a diamond bit, and it'll burn. I tend to not mess with the power on these. I run them wide open, and they work really good. The only time I would turn this down to about half or 20,000 would be if I'm using a cutoff wheel, and you can see me doing that somewhat with a wire. I use a little Dremel cutoff wheel. But here's an old bit that came. It was from the fire. Some of these worked fine, I noticed as I checked them out, and others took the temper out of them, and it's really strange. And the exact same thing with the tools. If you're a subscriber and you go in and you look, I do play around with a couple of the chisels that the handles are charred on them, and you would think they would be just fine, because you got to get those things up into 1200, 1600 degrees to take the temper out of the tool. And I would have thought that amount of temperature would burn the wood up. The wood would just disappear, and you'd be left with a carving tool with a tang, and that's not the case. So I assumed that if they're slightly charred, that the temper would still be fine in those tools, and it turned out that also is not the case. Several of those need new handles and re-gimbaled. So if you watched the other video, this was an owl that I did with the Ramelson knife, and Groot, my Mastiff, decided to change the profile on it a little bit. So no longer is it an owl. It's a piece of scrap wood now. So you see, I turned the handpiece off. It's got a nice cord on it. It is a little bit thicker around than the one that I'm used to using, and I'm persnickety, and I noticed that now. But after the end of about 3 hours of carving, I didn't notice. So here's some bits I ordered. These came from Cutsall. There's a link down there that you can save some money if you're interested. But here is the original fine, and they're gold. I did order 2 of them. I do have some old ones over there that went through the fire, and then on the right is the coarse. Again, if you're watching Jordy Johnson Carving Fusion, he likes Cutsalls. Rob likes Cutsalls. They seem to be the standard. The other one is a Saber burrs, and there's an old one and a new one side by side. The gold helps you tell the grit on those. I don't. Jordy uses Extreme Cutsall on his, and I think it's an 1/8 inch, but he goes with a Fordham, a little bit more powerful than the hand piece. And when we get into carving, I'll explain a little bit of difference on how I get a lot of wood removed fast. And I don't use the extremes. They're a little bit too much for these hand pieces, and you need a little bit of a gentler touch. Like I said, Jordy got rid of his because it kept cutting off on him. I didn't intend it. This is the only one I have right now, and I figured throughout the course of carving, I got a gnome carving coming up, that it would get hot, or I would overstress it, and it would kick off. My old ones, from PGL, did. If you were not paying attention and getting too aggressive, they would shut down, and you'd have to turn them off and turn them back on. This one never did that, and I didn't intentionally press on it really hard to see if I could. I was being conservative. I didn't want to ruin. No sense in burning up the first one, the only power carver you got. So you saw there, that's the collet that slides over the 1/8 inch bit, and you can see that's a little bit loose. And I did change that collet out because I've got a couple of extra ones. And ironically enough, they actually came from PJL. I asked him to send me a collet he had on a shelf when he sent me the burner. That being Pat over there at PJL Enterprises. And I do a that sounds funny. I do a review of the Ultima wood burner that I replaced those in. And there's a quick little section from the next video that you'll see, a little gnome that I did with the first power carving with the new stuff, and to see how this thing works. I did like it. I like the way it works. I think it'll work out just fine. I do like the fact the dual burner that I showed you up front there is probably eventually what I will go with, and see how that goes, so I can have the two hand pieces with the different collets, the 1/8 inch and the 32nd collet in it. It's got the quick release. I like that function. I don't have to grab a tool and to change a bit. It's a little bit annoying. And here's something that's interesting. I told you that I bought 2 of each of these, the coarse and then the gold one, which is the finer. And the first one that I put in the piece there had a little bit of vibration to it. These, if you leave the bits in these things and you knock it off the shelf and the bit hits the floor first, a lot of times it's just enough to bend the shaft a little bit and get this out of sync, and it vibrates and you can feel it in your hand, and it's annoying. This bit was annoying right out of the box. It was rough, and I was reviewing a hand piece, my initial thoughts were, oh no, this thing's got vibrations in it, I'm not going to like it. So I opened up the second bit and put it in there, and it's smooth as glass. So right out of the box, one of these Cutsalls came, as far as I'm concerned, basically not usable. It has a vibration to it, and when that vibration, you run it for a little while, it'll certainly work, but I think it'll tear up your bearings and tear up your handpiece, and there's just no sense in using it. It's a $15 bit, and why you would wreck a $200 or $300 handpiece for the sake of saving $15. A lot of people don't like to use these Cutsall bits, and they'll use a Dremel. Well, Dremel really wasn't designed. It's just tool steel, and it doesn't work as well as these Cutsalls. So rather don't cheat yourself and save $7 by using a Dremel bit in there. Go ahead and get a Cutsall or a Saber bit. And like everything else, that's my opinion, and there's a lot of other opinions out there. And I don't get paid tons of money by Cutsall to pimp their bits, for sure. But some people will only use the Cutsalls and won't use the Saber. I use them both because they both have their uses in different things. And here was what I was talking about, those 2 identical bits. I've talked about if you bought 2 knives or 2 chisels before of the same make and model, one would be different. There's how the gnome ended up that you'll see in the other. He got a paint job. It seems to be a little Christmassy, I guess. But as far as this power carver, the Icube or Icube from Ram, I think it's a quality one. And for $180, it would certainly set you up well. And we'll talk about it a little bit in the next one. Hey, thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake. Like, comment, and subscribe as always.